mother on you, and now you all have to stay quiet for a bit. But look, Maura asked me to make a deal with the penalty points issue, which I suppose was the root of our involvement, or the beginnings of our involvement with Garda Síochána. Through that work and through other people around the country contacted us on various issues of injustice, we drew a lot of conclusions ourselves to the huge body of work about the need to have a complete and utter overhaul of Garda Síochána, a new system of accountability, and indeed we'll be asking a lot of the questions that Hilary posed as well, and we kind of culminated in a piece of legislation which Mick moved in the summertime for a huge reform of Garda Síochána, but he's going to deal with the meat, if you like, of that proposal, and what I'll do is just tell you the story of how we came to be involved and a bit of the history of the penalty points issue, which was back in the news again during the week with the antics of the Garda Commissioner. But ironically, what some people might know is, I suppose, our involvement with the Garda whistleblowers in this case actually started as a result of the protests here and in Corrib, and it was the cases of the rape allegations and that being brought to the public eye 2 years ago with the protesters here in Corrib. There was a Vincent Brown programme on that dealt with that issue. I was on the panel and I made some points obviously in support of the protests here, but particularly about the fact that things hadn't changed much since Donegal or since Morris, and that you weren't talking about isolated misconduct of an individual Garda here and there, but there was a systemic problem of accountability within Garda Síochána. And the first whistleblowing guard happened to be watching the TV that night, said, oh, that's somebody who I think I could get on with, and he contacted me after that and arranged to come up to Dublin. Now, he outlined a litany of corruption inside the Garda Síochána in the districts of Cavan and Monaghan. In particular, penalty points wasn't a big part of that agenda. He didn't really want us going public on the issues at that stage, but really just wanted us to know, teed up the issues and said that he would stay in contact with us, and he did that over the course of probably the next 9 or 10 months. And then it was really the summer of 2012 when we were in the news a bit at that stage, a lot of the media being incredibly negative about us, that the second whistleblowing guard said, God, these people seem to have a bit of backbone, I think we'll get in touch with them again. And this time they were ready to go public. We went down to Cavan and met them and heard a lot of very horrific stories about how ordinary citizens who happened to live in the wrong place, be a neighbour of somebody who was a friend of the Guard or whatever, whose lives were ruined really by lack of Garda accountability. And ironically, one of the stories that they told us that time were featured on the news this morning as we were coming up, where GSOC has now reopened the case as a result of there was a murder in Limerick a number of years ago, a woman, Roach Kelly. But prior to her murder, the perpetrator of that murder had been apprehended in Cavan, had brutally assaulted a bus driver at that time, and the Gardaí failed to deal with him, let him go, and he went on to murder the other woman afterwards. And this, one of our whistleblowing guards, if you like, are at the centre of that controversy as well. So I think the reason, I suppose, the guards, when they came to us, and I think it is important to say that, is they did everything they could to deal with the penalty point issue and the abuses that they saw inside the force using the correct channels. And it was only in desperation, having exploited everything else, that they ended up coming to us. And I think that is important to spell out, particularly in light of the comments made of the Garda Commissioner and particularly Minister Shatter, who sought to discredit those whistleblowers at every turn, make out they're a bit off their head, they're only looking for a bit of attention or whatever. Their pursuit of justice has been going on for a long time, even before it's reached the public eye. And what they did was they utilised the new internal system which was set up after the Morris Tribunal. We were told after Morris, the blue wall of silence where Gardaí were protecting other Gardaí, that was going to be broken down, and Gardaí could report malpractice from inside. They set up a new confidential recipient system which a guard could go to, not only could go to, but was actually obligated to go to if they suspected malpractice or corruption. Now, these two guards did go to the confidential recipient in in January of 2012, almost 2 years ago now, at this stage, one of the complaints was against the Assistant Commissioner and the Garda Commissioner himself, and the confidential recipient handed over that information to the Minister for Justice, who promptly handed it over to the Commissioner himself. So the person against whom the complaint was made was the person given the information, against all rules of natural justice and so on. Now, we know from correspondence that we've seen that in February of 2012 the confidential recipient spoke to Alan Shatter, the Minister for Justice, told him about the whistleblower. He knew about some of the allegations about corruption. We know he met Shatter again before Easter and discussed the allegations in broad terms, not in detail, but in broad terms. And we know in May that the whistleblower sent the confidential recipient a lot more information with the allegations of the penalty points, and the Minister for Justice did not want to know. Presumably he was chatting with his good friend the Commissioner on a few occasions, and the Commissioner probably told him, Asher, don't be worried about that now, there's nothing in that. In desperation, the whistleblower went to your very own Enda Kenny in July of 2012, gave him information, offered to meet the Minister for Justice with his legal team. His legal team actually coincidentally happened to be Michael McDowell, believe it or not, but that he'd meet with his legal team and produce files and information. Enda Kenny got back to him and said, Shatter will get on to you personally. He wrote in August, he wrote in September, he sent the dossier of information with these so-called names that the media were getting all excited about, which to be honest was never an issue for us. This was never about individuals, but the media were keen to exploit that kind of thing. And again, we were told that the Minister said he would deal with it. So it was only after going through all those steps that they then came back to us again and said, right, look, can ye help us in any way? And an important point to make in light of the antics of the Garda Commissioner this week trying to stifle the Public Accounts Committee is that, in our opinion, they're perfectly legally entitled to approach members of the Oireachtas with information under Section 62 of the Garda Síochána Act. That was one of the changes brought in, and I think that was a good measure and one that we were glad to avail of. Now, I'll just maybe briefly deal with what is at the heart of the penalty points issue. I mean, in many ways it's insignificant compared to what you've been through here, but it was never about a person getting off here or there, a bit of discretion, saying, oh, sorry about that, Sergeant, I was just rushing to go to the doctor, that's all right, Mary, don't do it again. It was never about that, or being rigid or ridiculous about it. What was at stake here really was systematic abuses, multiple terminations for privileged people, and that's really what it was. One law for connected people, one for everybody else, and everybody else knows that, because if you get a fixed charge notice and you write in to appeal it, contrary to what the Dáil discussions would have you believe, that you only have to nearly write a letter and the lads will quash the ticket for you. In reality, unless you're in the know and connected, it doesn't happen like that. You get a letter back saying, listen, if you're not happy with that, go into court and defend the action. That's what the penalty point system is supposed to be. But instead, of course, we had the scenario where, again, I think one of your own judges, but certainly a number of judges, for example, were in receipt of getting their penalty points terminated, not once, not twice, 3 times, by the same guard. And the whole justice system is called into question by that, because these judges, and there's at least 3, if not 5, are every day, probably last week, sitting in judgment on other motorists, issuing them with penalty points and fines. We know of people who've lost their livelihood, taxi drivers and so on, who got too many penalty points. They don't get off or anything like that, but these people do. And actually the prosecutions, anybody who was given a sentence or a penalty by a judge who benefited from a guard, if that guard was prosecuting the case, the person has a very valid claim to get that decision overturned. So there's huge issues at stake. There's the loss of revenue to the state, and of course there is the point about undermining the work of honest Gardaí. There's been a lot of talk about discretion, but what they're not pointing out to you is that guards exercise discretion every day of the week, and we know that. But we're talking about instances where the ordinary guard has used his discretion and has decided that yes, you did violate the Road Traffic Act. And then some senior guard over his head in another district, because he's married to your man's sister or whatever, comes over and presses the button and quashes that ticket. So that's an entirely different matter than reasonable discretion. There are whole other issues that came into it about serious legal experts. The most preeminent legal expert in road traffic legislation in Ireland, a man called Robert Pearce in Kerry, who actually wrote a lot of the legislation. He says there's no basis in law at all for any discretion or for writing any of them off. That it's literally a case of if you're not happy, go to court. And even the Guard's own circulars sort of say, you know, it's above certain ranks can do it, and only in the most restrictive of conditions. Really, you're talking about an ambulance or a fire brigade on the way to the fire, a Garda car in the middle of a high-speed chase, and maybe somebody in a private car on the way to hospital if they're being escorted by a guard. It's nearly that tight. So a lot of what they've said in the public domain is nonsense, and I won't take up the time of the meeting by the examples, but a lot of them ended up in the papers. You know, people, one family in Dublin getting 8 tickets written off by the same inspector, another person getting tickets quashed. They had 5 medical emergencies in the 1 month, coincidentally. Another Garda who was told that the image on the camera was unusable, even though there was 12 other people stopped at roughly around the same 10 minutes. None of them, their cases had unusable images. They all coughed up and paid up. And there were so many examples like that, that the volume of evidence would show you that there really was something not right here. And the Garda Commissioner, from the very beginning, sought to dismiss this. He went public last December after we raised it to say, issue a press statement, no less, to say and talk about the investigation, and before it was even on, to say that there was no question of a culture of non-enforcement. So you kind of knew what the outcome was going to be even before we heard it. But I mean, that's exactly what we were alleging, and that is exactly what does go on. It is a culture, and I would say that we were blocked at every turn in trying to raise these issues. We sought to have questions put down in the Dáil over a period of months. They were ruled out of order. We were told the Minister had no responsibility for it. There's a lotto system that applies in the Dáil. Funnily enough, our questions would always be at the bottom of the lotto, so they'd never have a chance of getting heard. You'd never have a chance of challenging the Minister. And this went on for a period of time. Behind the scenes, we've been dealing with the likes of Prime Time and the Irish Times and giving them some information. And finally, we had to just take, on one of the days, Mick had been given a question on something completely different, and something about bus airing or something, with the Minister for Transport for Acker, and we just had to take, we knew that the whistleblowers had been in touch with the Minister, that we just had to take the chance, and he just got up and started talking to a completely different question and put the issue on the Dáil record about what had gone on, about the allegations that were made, and the Minister actually took the bait and responded and acknowledged that yes, there was allegations out there and that he was aware of them. And it kind of, after that then, got into the public domain. They couldn't deny it, but you know, they might have been able to deny it, but did they own up and say, fair play to you, God, that's great, and fair play to the whistleblower, we've a lot to be grateful for, now we can clean up the act? Absolutely not. I mean, from the very beginning, they sought to diminish, downplay the seriousness of this. Sure, it's only much ado about nothing. The internal inquiry, we warned, that would never yield any results. Garda investigating themselves never worked. From the very beginning, Minister Shatter was saying, actually there was only 400 allegations, even though the whistleblower gave a sample of allegations, and it was, you know, in bold highlighted. This is an example of tens of thousands of others, but they kept talking about 400 and then saying, sure, a few of them were wrong and all the rest. I think it's worth saying, you know, particularly when you've had very bad experiences with a lot of guards here, that for a decent guard to try and raise their head and change the system is incredibly difficult. And what these two whistleblowers have been through is only absolutely shocking. I mean, they were demonised and isolated within the stations, within their union, the GRA. There was one of the at a GRA meeting, one of the union representatives started to do a threat about, you know, taking a gun to the whistleblower's head, not with a real gun, but saying this fella should be taken out. That kind of behaviour. And once it went public, the Garda issued an internal confidential circular reminding all the guards about their data protection responsibilities, threatening and intimidating them, telling them that it was a criminal offence for them to give any information to any source external to Garda Síochána, telling them that there was going to be an audit of the Pulse records and that anybody who used Pulse and was tracking it was going to be tracked down and they'd be watching who was accessing the files. Now, this from a force that leaks information to the press morning, noon and night, I know that from my own personal experience, a whole lot of other incidents as well, and they've no problem with that. This was a directive to warn the whistleblowers, to silence them. And over the month of December last year, the first fellow got a letter from Alan Shatter, this before the inquiry was even concluded, telling them that there was no case to answer. They were brought into the station, they were visited in their houses. One of the guards was stopped. He was bringing paper out of the station, which he used shredded material for bedding for his dogs. His car was stopped by the guards, searched and asked where was he going with the paperwork, what was it. One of them was out sick, he was visited at home at Christmas time, and they were read out an instruction from the Garda Commissioner himself that I, Clare Daly, or you, Clare Daly, are not allowed touch Pulse, you're not allowed to do this without a sergeant being over your head or whatever. So they did experience a hell of a lot of intimidation. We obviously in the aftermath months kept asking a lot of questions. We put the issues of the judges on the Dáil record. We tried to put the issue of the Garda Commissioner himself getting these tickets terminated, and then we were told afterwards, he was on his way to a high security meeting. Now, I mean, the fine was on the road very near his house, in his own car, at about 10:30 in the morning. So, I mean, you're not exempt if you're late for work, even if he was late for work. So, really stretching the sort of points there. I won't take up too much time, but the report was issued in May, the findings of the internal report and the finding of the Garda Professional Standards Unit. It's important to say they never once interviewed the whistleblowers, never, not once. The internal investigation was carried out by, wait till you hear this now, an assistant commissioner, 5 chief superintendents, 6 superintendents, their staff, and an incident room of 7, right? And out of all of that, and we had a lot of evidence of them retrofitting records, that's probably what they were doing, given the written statements of them writing in. At all of that, they get a report that was described as a whitewash. Now, to be honest, it wasn't actually as much as a whitewash as you might be led to believe, because even within that, it was a bit like showing a picture of a cloudy day, but then talking about the sun. Because hidden within that report, there is even an admission of the deficiencies in the system itself, and I won't maybe go into them, but they've had to reissue a lot of instructions that were there. They disciplined 3 members allegedly. They talked about commissioning a lot of investigations and a new directive, but critically, we know that certainly for a period of time, the practice had stopped. It's also the case that subsequent to that, with far less resources, the Controller and Auditor General investigated the matter and found way more discrepancies than the internal Garda report did. He found that 1 in 5 cases were not being, if you like, the person got off in effect, and he looked at the whole area of summonses not being issued and strategically not being issued and all that kind of thing as well. Last couple of points I'll make on that. You'd think now that the Minister for Justice would be concerned about that, about questions of legality or whatever, and think, isn't it a good thing that these issues are being addressed? Absolutely not. As I say, at every turn they try to diminish it. We've said it's necessary for an independent inquiry. He has sent the documents to the Justice Committee. The whistleblower sent the documents to the Public Accounts Committee, and you will have seen during the week that the Commissioner instructed that committee to hand back the records, and the Data Protection Commissioner backed him up. Now, what is that about now? I mean, they've known for over a year that we've had access to this information. It's on the Dáil record, Shatter has been going on about it. So why are they asking for the information to be given back now? We know the Public Accounts Committee has set up a hearing for January where they're going to investigate the Commissioner and one of the whistleblowers. So I think this story, if you like, has more to run. And I think it has shown systemic problems of lack of accountability and a cover-up. And the last 2 points I'll make is that as a result of highlighting these issues, and really since for over a year now, when we've gone on record on this. We have been inundated with people, the length and breadth of this country, ordinary citizens who life's path just put them in the way of guards who had an agenda, and their lives have been destroyed, from planning issues to murders not being properly investigated, to sexual assault and rape cases not being investigated. Absolute horrendous examples from every county in the country. And we've had a number, we've convened meetings of all of those people. There were simply too many of them that we wrote back to them. We've had a number of meetings, and a few people from Mayo on them as well, and they'd be obviously unconnected issues to sort of the whole Corrib thing, but important nonetheless. We set up a group called Justice for All, which has been run by a number of these people, and all our, if you like, injustice cases go through that filter, and they were aired around the time Mick moved his legislation, because it's forced us to confront the fact that there is no accountability, that the GSOC set up, and we've met GSOC, and they're quite good people, but their hands are absolutely tied. I mean, their annual report that came out that gave evidence about the delays, about how the Garda frustrate them at every single turn, and that's going on all the time, as is leaking to the media, racial profiling, because I should say that the reason, I suppose, the penalty points issue was really just about a bit like how the Americans got Al Capone on tax evasion. They weren't really that bothered about his tax evasion, but that was the only thing concretely that could expose him and tie him to stuff where they could indict him. And this is a bit the same. The whistleblowing Garda's allegations, to be honest with you, are far more serious than the penalty points crisis, far more serious. But the penalty points issue was able to be tracked. There was evidence that they couldn't hide behind, and they were able to substantiate it. And that's what blew the lid on this. But behind that is a much more unhealthy can of worms on issues of racial profiling, of the pulse system being abused, of children of the traveller community being put up on the pulse system, one as young as 16 days old, like, you know, in a very, very sinister developments. As I say, a lot of cases uninvestigated and so on. So I've absolutely, and we have absolutely no doubt that this is a hugely important issue. And as a result of some of this stuff, which just sets the scene, and working with a number of people on the whole area of Garda accountability, it culminated in Mick moving legislation in the summer, which obviously the government voted down. But it is interesting to say that when he moved it over the course of the 2 days, 3 hours debate on this, the gallery was full of people from all over the country, all victims of Garda malpractice. Alan Shatter sort of diminished their cases, but said, Asher, look, if you have a case, let me know. So we went a couple of months ago with all of them to the Department of Justice with their files. My God, these people keep files, and deposited them all with the bell down. We're still waiting to see what he comes back with, but this issue is ongoing, and we're very glad to contribute to that. And I think the whole community here and the fire line that you've been under has been appalling from the point of view of your lives individually, but it has shed a spotlight on this practice, a spotlight that is actually becoming a bit brighter now, because I think a lot of people around the country are questioning this, and maybe like Hilary, we don't have all the answers, but we do think we're beginning to ask the right questions, and that's what Mick's legislation was about and what he's going to talk about now.